All right, thanks everyone for being here. I think we had a number of other people who signed up, but I'm going to record this. We'll just wait a couple more minutes. People tend to jump on a minute or two after the hour, so we'll just wait another second or two. All right, well, for the sake of time, we'll just get started. I'm hoping the other individuals who signed up will be coming on. Apologies for the soft sound in the background. That is my phone. And I don't know how to turn it off from here. But let's start. Well, thank you for taking some time this morning. We're hosting the SBA and having a better conversation about what is available in the PPP loans, specifically for our rural communities, which sometimes they don't necessarily have relationships with banks, and but just a general overview of what's going on. I'm Brittany Beyer. I'm the director of Grow North, and just to give you a little bit of information about what Grow North is, let's see if I can advance this. There you go. So we're one of the 9 regions of economic development. Grow North oversees 8 counties and 3 tribal nations in the Northwoods region, the very far northeast side. And we are a catalyst for economic prosperity in this region. We're focusing this year on workforce cultivation, our housing needs, and COVID-19 recovery, but most importantly inside of that, broadband. And, it's really important to just have an understanding of how we all sit with each other. So on the local level, we have industry partners. We work very closely with our economic development corporations and chambers. And we also work with Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, among other agencies. And we sit as kind of at the in-between intermediary. And we try to get the supports to our local communities in a way. So I'm going to stop sharing and just hand this over to Cindy and team to continue the conversation. And thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Lisa, for being here, and looking forward to hearing what you say.
Thanks, Brittany. And thank you to Grow North for giving us this opportunity to share information on the current economic aid overview. Let me get this going here. I'll just get started while we're waiting for this to come up properly. The SBA is administering vital economic aid programs that are providing a lifeline to millions of American small businesses. We are working to ensure this round of relief is accessible to all eligible entities, including those hit hardest and those in underserved segments. Today, we're going to talk about where we are at with the economic aid funding options. Again, all of the COVID-19 funding options, our current loan program details, including the PPP and the EIDL grant program details, including the targeted EIDL advance and the Shuttered Venues Operators Grant, and additional assistance and information about our resource partners. Currently, where we are, Congress intended this round of COVID-19 economic aid to support hardest hit small businesses and those in underserved segments, including women, minorities, and veterans. And the SBA is committed to ensuring the programs are launched as quickly as possible to deliver this aid. Here is key takeaways for today. We're going to talk about our current loan programs, including the Payroll Protection Program. As of right now, over 7.3 million PPP loans have been guaranteed by the SBA during the pandemic. And the PPP is a forgivable loan provided through a participating PPP lender to cover employee payroll and other covered eligible expenses. This is a forgivable loan. 60% of it must be used for payroll, and the other 40%, a minimum of 60%, I should say. The other 40% or less can be used for covered eligible expenses, including payroll costs, rent, mortgage, interest, utilities, operations expenditures, property damage costs, supplier costs, and worker PPP. The other loan program is debt relief that is being offered to current borrowers with either an SBA 7A loan, 504 loan, or microloan. And then we also have the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, which with the Economic Aid Act has been expanded. The application window has been expanded through December 31st of this year. And then also the grant program, the Targeted Idle Advance, that is an invite only program, which we'll talk about a little later. And finally, the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. And that application window is not yet open. However, we do have a very extensive list of FAQs for that program, and that is open to eligible live venue acts. Now I will turn it over to Lisa Taylor. And sorry, Lisa, I forgot to introduce you at the beginning, both of us. Lisa is an economic, outreach and marketing specialist for Western and Northwestern Wisconsin. And she works out of the Madison office. And so she is our PPP guru, and I'll turn it over to her.
Great. Thank you, Cindy. And good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk mostly about the PPP program. And before I dive into the information, I did want to provide some updated statistics so that people can kind of see where we are with the funding on this program and how it's being allocated. Since the PPP reopened on January 11th, there have been about 2.2 million PPP loans approved, totaling about $156 billion. So if you keep in mind that the total amount allocated by Congress was about $284 billion, we're at $156 billion, so you can kind of see where we are, and the fact that there are still plenty of funds to take us through the end of this month, which is when the deadline for applications are for the PPP program. About 90% of the loans approved through the PPP program are for $150,000 and under. And additionally, the average loan amount right now is about $71,000. So as you can see, the smallest businesses are able to obtain funding through the PPP program. And that was really our intent, especially with this latest round of PPP funding. We wanted to make sure that sole proprietors and smaller businesses could access this program. So the top takeaways for this particular program, and we'll go through each of these in future slides, are that we've expanded the eligibility for PPP so that now there are additional entities that can access the program. A borrower can now select their own covered period. So it used to be that you had to choose either 8 or 24 weeks over which to use your PPP funding. Now you can choose a time period between 8 and 24 weeks. There is a second draw PPP option, and this is very new to the program, and we'll cover that in a little bit. It also allows for the deduction of expenses that were paid for with forgiven PPP loan funds to be deducted on your federal taxes, which is good news for everyone. There is an updated simplified forgiveness application form, and that is for all PPP loans of $150,000 and under. And additionally, the SBA no longer has to subtract that EIDL advance from your PPP loan forgiveness amount, and we will also discuss that on a future slide. Next slide, please. So what is a first draw PPP loan? Well, at this point in the funding, it is for eligible applicants that didn't receive a PPP loan last year prior to that application window shutting down, which was on August 8th. The loan eligibility now will include some additional types of entities. The covered eligible expenses have been expanded, and that is good news as well for those of you who are using some of the funds on non-payroll costs. So just as a reminder of what you can spend the funds on, they include some eligible payroll costs such as wages and salaries and sick pay and that type of cash compensation, as well as some employee benefits. It also includes a range of non-payroll costs, which include business rent, mortgage interest for your business, business utilities, and now the expanded costs that you can use your funds on are certain property damage expenses. So if your property was damaged due to civil unrest and you are not able to obtain compensation from your insurance company or some other means, that can be included. There are certain operations costs, certain supplier costs, and then worker PPE. So if you have to buy masks and hand sanitizer and things like that for your employees, that is also a covered expense under this program. As I mentioned before, you can now set your own covered period to use the proceeds anywhere between 8 and 24 weeks. And that covered period does start on the day that your loan is dispersed to you by your lender. There are certain borrowers that can request an increase to their original PPP loan amount, which you would have obtained last year. And that will include certain farmers, certain partnerships, and certain seasonal businesses. It will also include any entity that returned all or part of their PPP loan funding prior to December 27th. And it will also include any borrowers that accepted a loan for less than what they actually qualified for. So if you were an entity that qualified for $100,000 and for whatever reason you only accepted $75,000, you can now work with your lender to submit a request for an increase on that original loan amount. One of the stipulations for the PPP program is that you must have been in business prior to February 15th of 2020. And the applications deadline for both the first draw and the second draw PPP loan will be March 31st of this year. So that at the end of this month, unless the congressional appropriations are exhausted. Now, we just kind of went through those numbers, so it appears as though there is plenty of funding to get us through this month, but we do just need to mention that if that funding were to be exhausted, then the application window would close earlier. Next slide, please. One other thing I did want to mention as part of the PPP program is that all or part of the PPP loan is forgivable. And in order to maximize forgiveness, you want to make sure that you're using at least 60% of your funds on those eligible payroll costs, which means that no more than 40% of those funds should be spent on the non-payroll costs. Additionally, to figure your max loan amount under your first draw, you would take your average monthly payroll costs, multiply that by 2.5, and those average monthly payroll costs can be either from 2019 or 2020. So to be eligible for that first draw, if you were an eligible entity last year under the program, then you're still eligible as long as you are still meeting the size standards as set by the SBA, which is traditionally 500 employees or fewer. There are some sectors that have different size standards according to revenue, but as long as you meet those size standards, you're still eligible if you're a sole proprietor, an independent contractor, or a self-employed individual, even if you have no other employees other than yourself. Business entities such as partnerships, corporations, and LLCs, the nonprofit organizations that are organized as 501c3s, veterans organizations organized as 501c19s, and then tribal businesses. Now, the newly eligible entities with the Economic Aid Act now include housing co-ops, destination marketing organizations, certain 501c6 organizations, which includes chambers, and then eligible news organizations. Next slide, please. So the second draw PPP is the newest part of this program, and it's for borrowers that previously received their PPP loan, so they've received a first draw. They have no more than 300 employees, and they can show that they've suffered at least a 25% reduction in gross receipts. And we're going to talk about how to calculate that on the next slide. This slide talks about how to calculate your maximum loan amount under the second draw. So for most borrowers, that's going to be 2.5 times their average monthly payroll costs. And again, you can choose either 2019 or 2020, and that's up to a cap of $2 million. If you are a business that's in the accommodation and food services sector, which means that your NAICS code starts with a 72, your maximum loan amount under the second draw is going to be 3.5 times those average monthly payroll costs of either 2019 or 2020, and again, up to a cap of $2 million. Now, there is a specific loan application form that you'll need to use, but your lender is going to have that. So this is a loan where you're going to go to your lender, just like you did for the first draw PPP. Next slide, please. So to be eligible for the second draw, again, you must have previously received a first draw PPP loan, and note that your covered periods cannot overlap. So those covered periods are anywhere between 8 and 24 weeks. And if you've just recently received that first draw PPP loan, just know that you have to at least get through that 8-week covered period at a minimum before your second draw could be dispersed to you. So the additional criteria is that you have used or will have used your full first draw loan funds only for eligible expenses before your second draw loan can be dispersed to you. Again, you have no more than 300 employees, and you can demonstrate at least a 25% reduction in gross receipts between comparable quarters of 2019 and 2020. Those quarters do need to be calendar quarters. So for instance, if you're looking at second quarter of 2020, you're looking at April, May, and June gross receipts, then look back at second quarter of 2019. And if that second quarter gross receipts in 2020 is at least 25% less than the gross receipts in second quarter of 2019, then you've met this point of eligibility. Next slide, please. So the loan application process, whether it is a first draw or a second draw PPP loan, is that you're going to find a PPP lender. Now, if you're doing your second draw, you can go back to the lender that you used for your first draw, but it's not required. It may be easier because there may be paperwork that they already have that you wouldn't need to resubmit to them in order to apply for your second draw. But it's not required that you go back to your first draw lender. If you're applying for your first draw and the lender or the bank that you normally work with is not participating in the program, then you can go to Lender Match. And Lender Match is at sba.gov/lendermatch. And that is a program that matches business owners to lenders that are willing to make a loan to that business owner. So that can work for the PPP loan. It can also work for other SBA loans. Now, specifically with the PPP loan, if you go to sba.gov/paycheck protection/find, you can also find a list of those lenders that are working in the PPP program near you that could make that loan for you. And then finally, towards the end of our presentation, Cindy's going to talk about our Sba Resource Partners and how they can help you in looking at lenders for financing, at other areas of your business, and receiving some help with those areas. Step number 2 is that you'll complete the application. And you're going to include all of the supporting documentation. So your lender is going to have the correct application for you. And with that application comes a document of instructions. And if you read through those instructions, it's going to indicate how to complete the application, as well as a list of any documentation that needs to be included with your application form. And then step number 3 is that the SBA is going to issue a loan number to your lender. So once your lender submits your application, the SBA will do a compliance check and a fraud check. And once those checks are done, they're going to issue that loan number to your lender. And again, just a reminder that March 31st is the deadline for applying either first or second draw. Next slide, please. And if there is any part of your loan that is not forgiven for whatever reason, the loan terms under the PPP program have not changed. They're the same as what they were last year. So that means they have a fixed interest rate of 1%. There's no requirement for collateral or personal guarantees. There are no fees or prepayment penalties. There is a 5-year maturity. So if you had your loan approved on or after June 5th, you automatically have a 5-year repayment period. If your PPP loan was approved prior to June 5th of last year, you have a 2-year repayment period, but you can work with your lender to get that extended to 5 years. Your lender will be in touch with you once they know how much of your loan is to be repaid. And you do have a 10-month deferral time period on this loan before any payments need to start. So the 10-month deferral period is going to start on the last day of your covered period. And throughout that 10 months, you don't have to make any payments on your PPP loan. If you do not apply for forgiveness during that 10-month period, then you will need to start making payments on your loan. Now, the process is that once you submit your forgiveness application to your lender, they have 60 days to review that and send it to the SBA. The SBA then has 90 days to review your application and documentation to make their determination. And once they've done that, they'll be in contact with your lender, and then your lender would be in contact with you to let you know if anything is due and when those payments would start and how much they would be. Next slide, please. So the loan forgiveness on the PPP loan is that you're going to, of course, apply for that through your lender, the same lender that provided the loan to you. And there have been some updates per the Economic Aid Act. One of those updates is that the idle advance is no longer deducted from your PPP loan forgiveness payment. And just some history on that particular point. Last year, if you applied for the EIDL loan, which was the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, that was a loan you would have applied for directly from the SBA. There was a period of time where there were advances being issued to those that had applied for the loan. Those advances were anywhere between $1,000 and $10,000, depending on the number of employees you had. That advance was meant to be a grant, but under the CARES Act language, that advance was required to be deducted from your overall PPP loan forgiveness amount. With the Economic Aid Act, that has been repealed, and that's why at this point, the EIDL advances are no longer being deducted from your overall PPP loan forgiveness amount. Additionally, expenses that you've paid with your PPP loan funds are federally tax deductible, And just a couple weeks ago, the state of Wisconsin passed legislation so that under the state tax returns, if your PPP loan funds were either forgiven or not forgiven, you can now deduct those expenses you paid with those funds from your state tax return as well. The expanded forgivable expenses, so some of those additional non-payroll costs that you can spend your or use your PPP funding to pay for are permitted for any PPP loan that hasn't gone through that forgiveness process. And then that simplified forgiveness application that we talked about is just a very streamlined one-page application. It is for those borrowers that have a PPP loan of $150,000 and under, which is great news because as we talked about at the beginning, at this point, there have been about 90% of the loans that have been funded have been for 150,000 and under. So the vast majority of you should be able to utilize this very streamlined forgiveness application. And then finally, forgiven PPP loans are not federally taxable income. Next slide, please. Okay, so before I turn this over to Cindy to finish up, Jim, it looks like you have a question. Did you want to go ahead and ask that?
Yeah, so I work for a legislator and I get a lot of requests and inquiries about PPP and EID loans. And the one in particular that I just got yesterday, they're looking for their second draw of a PPP program, but it seems like they have a bankruptcy in their past and they're wondering if they're still eligible for that second draw, considering they have a bankruptcy on their record.
Yeah, so the guidance that we've been receiving is that if they are actively in bankruptcy, then they may not be eligible. But if it's in their past, then that doesn't necessarily preclude them from the program.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. All right, so at this point, I'm going to turn the rest of the webinar over to Cindy.
Thank you, Lisa. Now we'll move on to the COVID-19 Economic Injury Disaster Loan, also known as the EIDL. Some stats on the EIDL as of February 25th. Nationally, SBA has approved 3.7 million loans for over $200 billion. And in Wisconsin alone, there have been over 38,000 loans approved for over $1.9 billion. The EIDL loans are direct loans from the federal government. EIDL has existed for many years and has historically been used to help businesses and communities after natural disasters. This is the first time it's been used nationally and for a pandemic. And the EIDL provides economic relief to businesses experiencing a temporary loss of revenue due to COVID-19. The economic aid passed at the end of 2020 extended the EIDL application deadline through December 31st of 2021. EIDLs are low-interest, long-term loans that can be used for working capital and normal operating expenses such as continuation of healthcare benefits, rent, utilities, and fixed debt payments. The EIDL offers reasonable terms, and they are 3.75 fixed for businesses, 2.75 fixed for nonprofits, with a maturity of 30 years and no prepayment penalty or fees. Collateral is required for loans over $25,000. And payments are deferred for 1 year. However, interest still accrues. Borrowers may make payments if they choose to do so. And to qualify for the EIDL, businesses must have been in operation on or before February 1st of 2020. Small business owners, cooperatives, and qualified agricultural businesses with 500 or fewer employees in all U.S. states and territories are currently eligible to apply for the COVID-19 EIDL. And agricultural businesses include those businesses engaged in the production of food and fiber, ranching, and raising of livestock, aquaculture, and all other farming and agricultural related industries. And the EIDL loans come directly from the SBA. You do not apply through the lender. You can go to the SBA.gov SBA.gov/disaster website, and you find the application there. Now we'll move on to a new program that was introduced with the Economic Aid Act. It's called the Targeted Idle Advance. And there is no action required by a borrower until they are contacted by the SBA via direct email. The Economic Aid Act provides $20 billion for the Targeted Idle Advance program. And this means that up to $10,000 grants will be available to those in low-income communities who previously received a CARES Act idle advance for less than $10,000, or who applied for the CARES Act idle advance but received no money because the $2 billion that was appropriated with the CARES Act funding was exhausted. So the first priority group for the targeted idle advance, the SBA will balance out a previous idle advance to the full $10,000 if the business is number one, in a low income community, number two, suffered greater than 30% economic loss, and three, has 300 or fewer employees. Now, the second priority group for the targeted idle advance are those who applied for an idle advance but didn't receive funds due to the lack of funding. You will receive a full $10,000 if you meet the same requirements as those in the first priority group and per funding availability. The SBA, again, will reach out to those who may qualify via email with instructions to determine eligibility and how to submit documentation. And you just want to make sure that any email that you get from the SBA ends in sba.gov. We are trying to be very careful about scams and fraud with this Economic Aid Act. So again, make sure emails come from sba.gov. Now this slide is just an eligibility and how to submit the application if you do receive the email invitation regarding the targeted idle advance. And again, these are the items that you'll need for the application. I won't spend much time on this. And again, this is regarding the targeted idle advance if you do get the email invitation to apply. One thing we just want you to make sure that all of the information on the application is correct, especially the bank account information, because you only get one shot at your application. And so you want to make sure everything is correct. Now, if you do receive an email invitation and you do have questions, there is a email address called targetedidleadvance@sba.gov, and a borrower can submit questions to that inbox. And now I'll move on to another new program that was introduced with the Economic Aid Act. It's the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, also known as the SVOG. And the application window for this program is not yet open. This program was established by Congress, and they have set aside $15 billion in grants to shuttered venues. And eligible applicants may qualify for SVO grants equal to 45% of their 2019 gross earned revenue, with the maximum amount available for a single grant award of $10 million. And $2 billion of the $15 billion is reserved for eligible applications with up to 50 full-time employees. So if you do plan on applying for the SVOG, we ask that you complete registration in the federal government system for award management at sam.gov. There is a tutorial on the SBA's website for how to navigate the sam.gov website, and you can go to sba.gov/SVOG to find that. Now, eligible entities for the SVOG include live venue operators or promoters, theatrical producers, live performing arts organization, and motion picture theaters, relevant museum operators, zoos, and aquariums, talent representatives, and up to 5 business entities owned by an eligible entity. In addition, venues must have been in operation as of February 29th, 2020, and must not have applied for or received a PPP loan on or after December 27th of 2020. And again, I want to mention that you can visit SBA's website at sba.gov/SVOG for the most current information on this program, including eligibility requirements, frequently asked questions, and the sam.gov registration video tutorial. On this slide is a slide containing a cross-program eligibility matrix. And it shows like if you received a PPP, can you get an EIDL? Or if you apply for SVOG, can you get a PPP? So it's a nice matrix that just is a very basic matrix. It does not include all of the details of the new and current economic aid that is available or forthcoming. And you can visit our website at sba.gov coronavirus relief to see this as well. The SBA is providing SBA-backed loan debt relief and payments on certain SBA-backed loans. Borrowers who have an 7A, 504, or microloan may be eligible for SBA-backed debt relief, depending on when the loan was approved and additional criteria. If you are one of the borrowers who meets the criteria, the SBA will automatically provide debt relief, and you will get a letter from the SBA on official SBA letterhead outlining your debt relief parameters. If you have questions about this, please contact your lender. And again, I want to reiterate, in general, please be aware of scams. Correspondence from the SBA will come via an email ending in sba.gov, or in this instance, for debt relief, you will get a letter on official SBA letterhead. Now we'll move on to the key takeaways for today's presentation. Again, the PPP, that program closes on March 31st, 2021, and you should contact your lender to apply for that. Debt relief, will be made available to 7A, 504, and microloan borrowers, and you should contact your lenders for questions on that. And if you are eligible for that, you will get a letter from the SBA. The EIDL is the low interest long-term COVID-19 economic injury disaster loan, and that remains available through December 31st of this year or until funding is exhausted. And the targeted EIDL advance, SBA is reaching out to potential eligible applicants for the targeted EIDL advance. And finally, our grant program, the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. The application window is not yet open for this. However, there is great information on the SBA's website at sba.gov/SVOG. Here's a slide containing the SBA Resource Partners. The Resource Partners are independent organizations funded through SBA cooperative agreements and grants. We highly recommend contacting a resource partner if you have business counseling needs, such as writing a business plan, strategic marketing, or learning about financing and grant programs in your area. Their services come at no cost to you, and many offer low-cost business courses as well. In Wisconsin, we have our SBDC network, the Small Business Development Centers. They are located mainly on the UW campuses, four-year campuses, and they can help you with a plethora of business counseling needs. We also have our women's business centers. In the Eau Claire area, we have the Western Wisconsin Women's Business Center. And throughout the state of Wisconsin, we have the Wisconsin Women's Business Initiative Corporation, also known as WIBIC. You do not need to be a woman-owned business to use their services. They will, accept anyone who gives them a call. Also, we have SCORE Mentors. It's a nationwide organization of business professionals who are experts in their specific area of business, such as business planning, real estate, marketing, accounting. So give them a call if you have any needs as well. And finally, our Veterans Business Outreach Center, or VBOC. Dan Newberry is our statewide representative, and their services are available for veterans or active military members and their family members who are looking to start a business or need counseling for an existing business. And again, please reach out to our business resource partners. They're all super people and are very knowledgeable. And finally, stay connected with the SBA. This slide contains information about how to get our e-newsletter, sba.gov/updates. I recommend signing up for that on the SBA's website. It will go out weekly or sometimes twice a week, depending on what updates are coming out. You can follow SBA on Twitter. And please email the Wisconsin District Office at wisconsin@sba.gov if you have any questions that were answered in this webinar, or really any questions in general about SBA services. Your email will be directed to the appropriate person that can help you. And you can visit our website, sba.gov/WI, to get a calendar of upcoming webinars and information about the Wisconsin District Office. And here at the bottom are just some general sba.gov web pages for the current coronavirus relief. And now, I guess we'll move on to questions. I saw, Jim, you had your hand up. Did you have another question you'd like to ask?
No, just the one. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Cindy, I have a couple of questions for potential people who would watch this recorded. My first question is, if a business doesn't necessarily have a strong relationship with a bank, what are some options for them to find an SBA approved lender for a PPP?
Lisa had mentioned in one of the slides, there's a lender match, and the SBA offers that program. They can find that at sba.gov/lender match. And what they go into that site, they answer, I think there's 10 or 13 questions about their business and give some information on how they can be contacted. And then within a couple of days, the lender will reach out to them.
Great, thank you. And on the Shuttered Venues grant, we have a number of arts organizations that are kind of multiple use spaces. I've been watching what's happening with other grants and other spaces. Are there going to be any conditions about having seats that are in place in order to be considered a live theater? Just hearing from others in the profession that's kind of a stipulation. Again, because our rural arts organizations are flex organizations, are there any stipulations around that?
Right. Good question. The FAQs for the SVOG, a new set just came out yesterday. And I will send you that link that you can share when you send out the video. But they have made adjustments for the fixed seating requirement to allow those venues that don't have fixed seating, they have an open space, to be eligible for the SVOG.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think because we had a number of people who signed up and didn't have time to attend, I'm hoping that they'll be able to really participate in the video. This was very helpful for me just to be able to guide people, and Jim, I suppose this is the same thing for you too. So thank you for your time, and if there's any other last questions, we can take those last questions. But yeah, I really appreciate your time and walking through that, and we'll be able to help our communities a little bit better because of that.
Thank you, Brittany, and thank you for having us.
Great.
You.
Have a good day.
Thank you.